All right, it's time for another 2019 college football team preview and prediction. These are detailed and in-depth preview and prediction videos where we go game by game through the schedule, try to come up with an overall season record, and determine exactly where the wins and losses will come. If you're looking for a 4 or 5 minute video for somebody to just put the schedule on the screen and tell you such and such team is going 10-2, this isn't for you. It's way more detailed than that. All these videos are 20, 25 minutes long. This one will probably be the same. And this is probably the most requested team that I have gotten over the course of this series of videos. And we've been doing them for about 2.5 weeks now, done 16 or 17. Still got a whole bunch more to go, but this is probably the team that I've been asked about the most or has been requested the most in the comments section, and I've gotten emails and Twitter messages and things like that. The Florida Gators. Hey, good morning, it's Uncle Lou here. Yeah, that's right, it's me, Uncle Lou, and I'm live again today for you on LouTube with another college football preview and prediction video. Subscribe to this channel if you're not already. I post college football videos almost every single day of the year, and a lot of them are even watchable. Give this video a thumbs up. We're getting close to the start of the college football season. Calendar turned to August today. No more months this year without college football, right? August 24th season kicks off this year. And Florida happens to be playing with a quote-unquote week 0 big game against Miami. So, of course, we're going to cover that game along with the rest of Florida's games in today's preview and prediction video. Yes, I'm a Georgia fan. Feel free to point it out in the comment section, though, in case I forget. Wouldn't you rather I just came out and told you instead of trying to hide it? Yeah, of course you would. People complain all the time about these announcers on TV saying, oh, such and such is obviously a fan of blah, blah team, but yada, yada, yada. At least I come out and tell you, okay? I'm a fan of college football. Georgia's my favorite team. All right, let's get on with today's preview. The Florida Gators. All right, you guys know how we do this. I'm going to take a few minutes and wrap up what happened to Florida in 2018. Look at maybe who they lost, who they have coming back, recruiting classes, things like that. Then we're going to throw the 2019 schedule up on the screen. I'm going to go through it game by game, give you a winner and a loser for every single game, and try to give you my thoughts or my rationale on why I'm picking them to win or lose each particular game. Dan Mullen back year 2, right? Cousin Eddie, this guy. How did he do last year? Well, I think better than a lot of people thought he would do. Florida had an epically bad year the season before, firing McElwain at the end, bringing Dan Mullen back from Mississippi State. Of course, Dan Mullen had been at Florida as on the offensive staff under Urban Meyer when they won a national title or two. Boy, that was a long time ago, wasn't it? Yeah, it was. Anyway, I digress. But they did go 9-3 last year in the regular season, 5-3 in the SEC, won a New Year's Six Bowl against Michigan, finishing at 10-3. So 10-3, 9-3 in the regular season, finished 3rd in the SEC East behind Georgia and Kentucky? Yep. Anyway, what was my prediction for Florida last year? I always like to throw last year's prediction up on the screen so you guys can laugh at me about how wrong I was, or I can brag about how right I was. So here we go. Here's the ending screen of the 2018 Uncle Lou Florida prediction. I had you at 8-4. So I was 1 game off overall. You were 9-3. I had you at 8-4. I had you losing to Mississippi State, which of course you beat. And I'll admit, I sort of talked myself into picking you to lose that game. I just thought it would be funny if Dan Mullen lost to his former team. In any case, you got the win. I think that was a road win, too. Picked you to lose to Georgia, which, of course, you did. Picked you to lose to South Carolina, which you almost did. You had to come back at the end, but you did beat them. And I picked you to lose to FSU just because they've had your number lately. But listen, Florida State had an epically bad year last year, sort of like Florida did the year before, right? No one really saw that coming from Florida State. So in terms of the games that you lost, only got one out of the 4 right. I had you losing again to Mississippi State, Georgia, South Carolina, and Florida State. In reality, you lost to Kentucky, Georgia, and Mizzou. Georgia and Mizzou blew you out back-to-back weeks for the 2nd year in a row. Something you probably need to work on if you really want people to take you seriously. But in any case, so what went right, what went wrong? Well, you had some good wins. The win against LSU obviously was a really big win. You beat them at home in a close, in a tight game, sort of a low-scoring game. The Michigan win at the end of the year in was it the Peach Bowl? I believe it was the Peach Bowl, New Year's Six Bowl. You can say what you want about, players sitting out or not taking bowl games seriously anymore or whatever. Bowl games still matter to me. Now, I'm not the one that has to prepare and play in those games, obviously, but there are a lot of people who are of the opinion that players just aren't taking these bowl games seriously anymore outside of the college football playoff. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. It's disappointing to me that is a trend that's going on, though, especially with these bigger New Year's Six bowls, But anyway, that's not the point. The point is you completely routed them. So whatever excuse Michigan fan wants to make, it's just as pitiful as Georgia fans making excuses about the Sugar Bowl, which I don't do. We just got whooped by Texas, period. Doesn't matter who sat out or who wanted to be there. The point is we lost. You won over Michigan. That's the point. Bragging rights over Michigan, you get there. Recruiting. Florida had an okay recruiting class last year. I think they finished 9th or 10th in the country, right? Now, there's a couple of problems with that. Number one, 9th or 10th in the country sounds good, but that's 4th or 5th in the SEC. That's number one. Number two, about 25% of Florida's 2019 recruiting class is not on the team. They either changed their mind, unenrolled after spring, transferred after spring. You had a couple that didn't qualify or never showed up on campus. So I don't actually think that recruiting class was a top 10 class. It was more like borderline top 20, considering the people that you ended up not getting. Now, that's still not terrible, but that's just reality. About 25% of that recruiting class is just not there. Doesn't matter why or whatever, that's just the facts. Dan Mullen has spent another offseason running his mouth to anybody that will listen about Georgia and any other topic or situation or story he thinks people want to hear his opinion on. And for the second offseason in a row, he's been made to look a little bit like a fool. Some serious offseason distractions going on at Florida yet again, most of them involving the 2019 recruiting class, but you've had a couple of other issues. Everyone knows about the Chris Steele situation. You lost the only quarterback you signed for the 2019 class. It's just been some things going on, and it may be some more to come here before the start of the season. Whether we hear about them or not, you may find out when the game starts, and I'll just leave it at that. But you're not required to announce suspensions ahead of time. Just keep that in mind. But anyway, top 10 team last year, finishing 6th or 7th, depending on which poll you looked at, and a legitimate preseason top 10 team for 2019, in my opinion. I don't think Florida is at the level of being a top 4 or 5 team yet, but maybe they're on their way. But they are legitimately a top 10 team in my mind. Vegas win totals. I like to look at this every time I do a team preview and prediction. What is sort of the betting public's opinion on Florida for 2019? Now, keep in mind, this is just a betting number. Doesn't mean this is going to happen. But the Vegas win total right now for Florida is sitting at 9 games. That just gives you an idea of where people think Florida is. Basically, what this means is that about half the people who are betting on Florida's wins for the season think Florida is going to win 10 or more games, and about half the people that are betting on Florida's win total for 2019 think Florida is going to win 8 or less games. Doesn't mean any of that's going to happen. Again, it's just a general idea of where the betting public is for 2019 on the Florida Gators. All right, let's talk about the offense and the defense, and then we'll throw the schedule up on the screen and go through it. Quarterback, Felipe Franks, I think he surprised a lot of people last year, and obviously Dan Mullen is going to get the credit for a lot of that. Is Felipe Franks an elite college-level quarterback? Will he ever be an elite NFL quarterback? No, he won't. But this is just proof that one of the things people say about Dan Mullen is probably true. He's going to get the absolute most out of whatever quarterback he has in his system, whether that's somebody like Dak Prescott, who now starts for the Dallas Cowboys, Nick Fitzgerald, who looked really good under Dan Mullen at Mississippi State and then sort of took a step back last year without Dan Mullen, or whether it's Felipe Franks, who obviously played way better in 2018 than he did in 2017 under Jim McElwain. In 2017, Felipe Franks had 9 touchdown passes and 8 interceptions. That's pitiful. That's a pitiful number of touchdown passes, especially when you consider the fact we're talking about the Florida Gators here. That's absolutely pathetic. 8 interceptions, that's too many. That was 2017. 2018, year one with Dan Mullen, 24 touchdown passes and only 6 interceptions. That's an elite number there. Now, I know you got the quarterbacks that are throwing for 30 and 35 and 40 touchdowns a year. Tua, Trevor Lawrence probably will this year, Kyler Murray last year. Felipe Franks is never going to be that, But this is proof that Mullen can work with almost any quarterback, right? Going from 9 touchdowns and 8 interceptions to 24 and 6, nothing short of miraculous. Let's just be real. Franks also gives you a little bit with his legs. He can run when the pocket breaks down. Franks' problem, in my mind, is a little bit of maturity. Not that he's a complete knucklehead. I mean, he's no Baker Mayfield or Johnny Manziel. Let's not get carried away. But you had some situations last year when things started going bad for Felipe Franks. I don't think he handled it really in quite the right way. Now, these are kids at the end of the day. We have to keep that in mind. But if you guys remember, they lost to Georgia. The following week, they played Missouri at home. They were getting absolutely blown out, and Felipe Franks was getting booed off the field by the home crowd. That didn't sit well with him. The following week, they played South Carolina at home. They were losing. The crowd was booing again. In the second half, Felipe Franks kind of took that game over, had a touchdown or two, and there's that scene, you've all seen it, where he scores the touchdown or runs into the end zone. I can't remember if he scored or he threw a touchdown pass or Florida. In any case, Florida scored. And you see players do this sometimes, but it's usually when it's an away game, right? And you're doing it to the opposing fans. You score a touchdown or you make a big play, and you look up at the opposing fan base in the stadium and you give them one of these, shh. Felipe Franks was doing that to his own fans, to his own home crowd when he scored that touchdown late in the South Carolina game. That's not really the type of behavior I think you want to see out of your quarterback, but again, he had really been through the roller coaster ride over the last couple of years, being terrible in 2018, the fans basically turning their back on him, or 2017, I'm sorry, and then a bumpy road in 18 with the loss to Kentucky, losing to Georgia, getting blown out the following week at home by Mizzou, and then you come out the next week, you're losing to South Carolina, they're booing again, you do something big in the second half, you come back and win, the emotions can sort of get the better of you. I'm not saying he's a bad kid or anything like that, but you'd like to see him move past that, I think, and he probably will. Running back situation, LaMichael Pirine. This guy's pretty good. I mean, I don't even think he was Florida's starter last year. In fact, I know he wasn't Florida's starter last year. But you know how these teams with multiple running backs, it almost doesn't even matter anymore who the starter is on teams like Alabama, Georgia, Florida last year, teams that have multiple running backs that are really, really good. But in any case, he wasn't the starter, and he still had 996 total yards last year. That's rushing and receiving, everything combined. He'll be the main guy this year. He will be the starter this year. Now, you have to have multiple running backs that you rotate in and out, but he'll be the workhorse for Florida this year, in my opinion, and from everything I read when doing this research this morning. Wide receivers, probably the best or second best position group on Florida's entire team. Florida is loaded at the wide receiver position with wide receivers that would either start or get a lot of playing time at almost any school in the SEC or in America, right? Van Jefferson, #1 wide receiver probably. I mean, you got multiple guys, but I guess technically he would be the #1. A playmaker, probably a future NFL player here in Van Jefferson. And Kadarius Toney, you got to have one player like this, it seems like, in today's college football, right? Sort of undersized, like a slot receiver, but really, really quick, fast, shifty, agility, the juke moves, the jump cuts, that kind of thing. You get that from Kadarius Toney, the type of guy. You know how you hear the saying, you need to get him the ball in space. He's that type of guy. And 6 foot is not all that short, to be honest. Georgia had a guy like this, Miko Hardman. He was about 5'10", 5'11", depending on who you believe or where you look. Kadarius Toney is that same type of player, in my opinion, 6 foot, 185. Exciting player to watch. And then you got Trevon Grimes, the other outside receiver, 6'5", red zone threat, guy can jump out of the building, that kind of thing. And the next 3 wide receivers on Florida's depth chart aren't that far behind these 3. I really think you have a really good group of wide receivers. Offensive line, as many good things as you want to say about the wide receivers, you have to say that many bad things about the offensive line. That is the main issue and concern for the Florida Gators this year, in my opinion. And when we get to looking at this schedule here, if the offensive line does not surprise a lot of people by playing a lot better than what most people think it's going to play, that offensive line is going to be to blame for a couple of Florida losses this year, I'm afraid. But I looked at Athlon Sports does a unit ranking within each conference where they list all the teams in the conference. So in the case of the SEC, where Florida is, there's 14 teams. And they rank every unit on that team 1 to 14, 1 being the best in the conference, 14 being the worst. Offensive line, they have you at 10th. Problem is you're replacing 4 starters off last year's offensive line. Now, last year's offensive line wasn't all that good, So sort of an Auburn situation, a similar situation with, where, you know, was it last year or this year with Auburn? I can't remember. Replacing a bunch of stars, but the ones you were playing weren't really all that good. So the ones that are coming in may end up being better. We don't know. But in any case, you're replacing 4 starters from last year's offensive line. Those 4 starters combined for 141 starts over their career. So you're breaking in some fresh faces on the offensive line this year. And like I said, that has to be the biggest concern. If you're a Florida fan and you're not concerned about your offensive line, you're a complete blind homer. That would be like me trying to say I'm not concerned about Georgia's wide receiver situation. Yes, we have talented wide receivers, but we don't have any that have ever played or caught any passes at Georgia. So yes, it's a concern. Until I see them get out there and do it, I'm a little skeptical. And if you're a Florida fan and you don't feel that same way about your offensive line, you're either football ignorant or you're just completely blind. One of the two. There is no other option. Defense, the defense, I think, played a little bit better last year than I thought it would. And I'm just going to be honest with you right up front here. I told you in the beginning I'm a Georgia fan. I'm not trying to hide that. I'm not a fan of Todd Grantham. I don't think Todd Grantham is anywhere near an elite defensive coordinator. And I think it borders if it's borderline if he's even good or not. Yes, he was at Georgia. I didn't like him there. Most Georgia fans didn't like him there. Third and Grantham. Ask any Georgia fan about Third and Grantham, they'll tell you. You found out about Third and Grantham on a lot of occasions last year. This guy blitzes 80-90% of the time. Now, he's a genius if he sacks the quarterback. He's an idiot if you get burned for a 40-yard touchdown pass, and that's just going to happen sometimes. Now, Florida can make a lot of that up with an elite defensive backfield, which they have. The offensive line I mentioned ranked 10th on Athlon in terms of defensive backfields in the SEC. Florida ranks 2nd or 3rd. Did I write it down? I didn't write it down. So it was 2nd or 3rd. I can't remember. I think they had LSU 1. Bama was either 2 or 3, and then Florida was either 2 or 3, and I think Georgia was right after that at 4. But in any case, you have an elite defensive backfield. So, you know, the hope is, if you're a Todd Grantham fan, keep sending the pressure and hope that the back end can hold up. And again, we'll see. Linebacker, I think you're okay. Starters at linebacker, depth is a little bit of an issue and a concern at linebacker. And again, it's not that there's no talent there. It's just it doesn't have a lot of experience outside of the starters. Now you have Reese, 4-year starter. He'll be the leader of that defense from an experience standpoint, sort of the quarterback of the defense type of thing. You got some good guys on the outside in terms of rushing the passer. So we'll see. Defensive line, top 2 or 3 in the SEC, I think. I think obviously Auburn, has the best defensive line in the SEC, in my opinion. I think you can make the case for Florida at 2 or 3. In any case, the defensive line and the defensive backfield are Florida's strengths, in my opinion. The linebacker, like I said, the starters, good to go. After that, some question marks. So overall, Florida's set to have a pretty good 2019, I think. Expectations are really high after winning 10 games last year. You returned 7 starters on defense, ton of talent at wide receiver. Felipe Franks, 2nd year under Dan Mullen. The Michael Pirine, almost 1,000 total yards last year. He comes back. Offensive line, of course, the question mark. All right, let's put the schedule up on the screen. We'll go through it game by game, and we'll see what's going to happen this year with the Florida Gators. All right, of course, the big one in quote-unquote week 0, in-state rivalry game, neutral site. I believe this is played in Orlando. Florida versus Miami. Florida, considerable favorite in this game. Miami, year 1 under Manny Diaz, who's never been a head coach before. Don't know who Florida's quarterback is going to be. Miami has some offensive line issues as well. Talented at the skill positions, though, especially at wide receiver. And I honestly think Miami has a better defense than Florida. I think Miami's defense is legit. I'm a believer in Miami's defense. I've done a preview on them already. If you're interested in my thoughts, more of my thoughts on Miami in particular, you can click back and watch that Miami preview. But their defense is for real, particularly their linebackers. They got 2 NFL linebackers for sure. They really good defense. They need to figure out something at quarterback. It's just hard for me to pick a first-year head coach to win a week 1 game of this magnitude. It's just hard for me to do it. I look back to Kirby Smart's first year, and I love Kirby Smart. I think he's an elite-level head coach. I think he's proved that over the last 2 or 3 years with his record and his wins against ranked teams and winning 2 division titles and an SEC title, undefeated in the East for 2 years in a row. But if you look back to his first season, he had some boneheaded losses there, and you can point to coaching as the reason why for almost all of them. His first game ever was against a terrible North Carolina team, and we barely won, okay? We barely won. That was with Sonny Chubb. or Sony Michel, Nick Chubb. I mean, a loaded team. We ended up going 8-5 that year. Miami's got a lot of talent. It's just impossible for me to pick them with it being Manny Diaz's first game. I'm just being honest, so I'm going with Florida to win. I think Florida probably has the better offense. I think Miami probably has the better defense. I think this has potential to be a really good game, especially maybe to some point into the second half. But I've got to go with Florida to get the win there. You start out 1-0. Then you have a bye week when everyone else is playing their first game in the quote-unquote week 1 then. All right, you come out of that, and you got a home game against a lower classification non-conference team, UT Martin. What does that stand for? University of Tennessee, Martin. Win. I was about to make some Tennessee jokes, but I'm just not going to do it. All right, and then after that, this is a big game for Florida, and it's been a long time since you've been able to say that, but you got to go on the road and play Kentucky. Now, a couple of things here about last year's loss to Kentucky. It was unacceptable. You lost at home to Kentucky. I get it. That was one of the best teams they've had in a while, but it was just an unacceptable loss. Your offense played terrible. That was just a head-scratching loss. Now, Kentucky loses their best player on offense and their best player on defense, Josh Allen, Benny Snell. They're gone. I still think I think people are reading too much into that. I don't think Kentucky is going to fall off the map this year. Will they win 9-10 games and come in second in the East again? I'm not so sure about that. But I don't think they're going back to 4 or 5 wins or anything like that just because they lost those 2 guys. And you have to remember, yes, Kentucky beat Florida last year for the first time in 31 years or whatever it was. But Kentucky had Florida beat each of the 2 years prior to that. And I think it was mental. It was a mental block, I think, on the part of Kentucky players and coaches of why they lost in 16 and 17. They outplayed Florida in both those years, 16 and 17, in my opinion, and should have won both of those games. Was it 17, wasn't it, when, they dominated Florida really, but then for some reason, on 2 occasions in that game, Kentucky only sent 10 men out on defense and left a Florida wide receiver completely uncovered for touchdowns, and that's the only reason Florida won that game. The year before, I believe it was, the game went to overtime in Florida. The point is Florida a better team than Kentucky this year? Yes, but you got to play them there. Not a huge home field advantage at Kentucky, but that crowd, as loud as a Kentucky crowd can possibly be, it will be that loud when you go there. First SEC game on the road at Kentucky. And the mental block is gone, okay? So if this game gets close into the second half, Kentucky's not going to think they have no chance. The 31-year thing is done now. I think you have potential to lose this game. I think you lose. I'm sorry. I think Kentucky beats you for the second year in a row. I'm going to talk more about this game in a minute. Don't get mad and click off the video. I'm going to clarify that comment when I get to some of the other games later in the schedule, okay? Tennessee at home, you'll win. I mean, Tennessee is going to be better than they were last year. They were 5-7, 4-8 the year before that. Big win on the road against Auburn last year. Somehow managed to beat Kentucky. I just don't think Tennessee still is anywhere near the level of a Florida, much less a Georgia or Alabama or anything like that. They're going to be better than last year. Jeremy Pruitt, second-year head coach, but Dan Mullen's been around a lot longer than that. If this game was in Tennessee, maybe you say, okay, this is the Auburn game from last year where Tennessee wins something you're not expecting them to win. I don't see Tennessee winning this game in the swamp. I'm giving you a win there. You're sitting at 3-1. Home game after that against a lower classification team that just doesn't matter. Towson, you'll get a win. Why spend any more time talking about that? All right, and now a series of games that are tough here. Home against Auburn, at LSU, at South Carolina. I'm going to give you a win over Auburn only because the game is at home. I see this game similar to the way I saw last year's LSU game. You got them at home. I think Florida and LSU were pretty evenly matched last year. I think Florida and Auburn are pretty evenly matched this year. I think home field in the SEC, especially big home fields, is an advantage. I think it's going to be enough for you to get that win over Auburn. But like I mentioned earlier, they've got the best defensive line in the SEC. If you get to this point in the season and the offensive line isn't any better than what some people think it will be, you have the potential to lose this game, okay? So if you want to get mad at me about the Kentucky game and give yourself a win there, that's fine. But then you at least need to acknowledge the possibility that you could lose this Auburn game, but I'm giving you a win. This has nothing to do with me being a Georgia fan, even though you're busy typing that right now. Between these two games, Kentucky and Auburn, I gave you the loss at Kentucky because it's on the road, and I'm giving you a win against Auburn because it's at home. But again, there's a possibility you lose the Auburn game, but I think you win. I give you the win. On the road at LSU, loss. I think LSU is a better team this year in 2019 than they were in 2018, and they were a top 10 team in 2018. I think they're going to be even better, particularly on offense. Again, you have to play them there. You've only beat LSU in LSU 2 times out of the last 7 times that you've played there. So you're 2-5 in your last 7 trips to Baton Rouge. Make it 2-6. I think LSU gets a home win against you. You lose that one on the road. And then another dangerous game. You have to play back-to-back road games within the SEC. That is extremely difficult to do. At LSU, then you get here at South Carolina. Close game last year between Florida and South Carolina. You guys pulled it off in the end after trailing for most of that game. I don't think South Carolina is going to be a whole lot better than they were last year or anything like that, but I also don't think they're going to be any worse than they were last year either. South Carolina's biggest problem in 2019 is its schedule. They play the best 3 teams or at least the top 3 teams in every preseason poll that you look at, Clemson, Alabama, and Georgia. On top of that, they have to play Texas A&M, who I think is a borderline top 10, top 15 team. They have to play you, a top 10 team. Their schedule is just brutal. And I didn't even mention Tennessee, Kentucky, Missouri. Their schedule is just brutal. Mainly because of that, I'm giving you a win against South Carolina. I think you beat them, even though it's on the road. You'll rebound from what I think will be a tough, hard-fought, close loss to LSU the week before. That takes you into your next bye week, and you come out of that. And, of course, you got the cocktail party. I think Georgia wins for the 3rd year in a row. 42-7 a couple of years ago, 36-17 last year. I think it'll be even closer this year. This game makes me nervous as a Georgia fan. I'm just going to be honest with you. People keep asking me what games am I worried about. Florida's on or near the top of that list. Florida, Auburn, Texas A&M. We play Notre Dame. I'm not as concerned about Notre Dame as I am Florida. I'll be honest with you. This game concerns me, especially if Florida's offensive line ends up being a lot better than what we think it will be. If Felipe Franks takes another step forward. I mean, if Felipe Franks is on pace to pass for 3,000 yards this year instead of the whatever he had last year, which I think was about 25 or 2,600, if he's even better, the wide receivers, you had some injuries in this Georgia game last year. If you avoid that at this point in the season this year and you have healthy defense out there, this could be a really close game. I do think Georgia is the better team. They've recruited at a much higher level over the past 3 or 4 seasons than Florida has, so the talent on Georgia's roster top to bottom is better than Florida's at this point. And Dan Mullen just hasn't proven to me that he can win the games he needs to win to get to a division title. And until he does, it's going to be hard for me to pick him to do that. He's been an SEC head coach for almost 10 years, and he's got zero division titles. I know he played in the West, but give me a break. Gus Malzahn even found a way to win a couple of division titles. I'm not knocking Dan Mullen. I think he's one of the best coaches in the SEC. But he's got to start winning some of these games before I think I would be comfortable to pick him to do it. I just think Georgia's a better team. Let's be real, it doesn't matter what kind of reason or explanation I try to give if you're a Florida fan. You're going to think I'm only saying that because I'm a Georgia fan, but I just think Georgia wins. I think this will be a close game. I've got you losing the cocktail party. Come out of that, you get another home game at Vandy. Now, the last couple of years when Georgia has beat you, you've turned around the following week and gotten blown out by an inferior team, Mizzou. I don't think Vandy is capable this year of doing that. I think they're probably either the worst or the second worst team in the SEC this year. I just think Vandy's going to be in for a rough year. I think you'll get a win. The most exciting thing about this game really is going to be seeing if Dan Mullen tries to fight Derek Mason again. That was the most exciting thing I saw probably in all of college football last year, was that going into halftime or close to it, Vandy was whipping Florida really early in that game. And Dan Mullen and Derek Mason got into it. Listen. Derek Mason would beat the hell out of Dan Mullen. Come on. But Florida won't lose the game. You got to win there. On the road at Mizzou, they have beat you like 100-20 over the last 2 years. I mean, they just absolutely have throttled and embarrassed you the last 2 years. You got to go on the road this year, win. I don't think they beat you 3 years in a row. I know they have Kelly Bryant. I question the motivation from Mizzou this late in the year. They can't, the playoff ban or the bowl ban and that. I know, Kelly Bryant, all Kelly Bryant, in my opinion, is looking to do is impress NFL scouts and try to get drafted. I mean, come on. Is he really that bought into Mizzou? I don't know. He's only there so Derek Dooley can get into the NFL. That's it. I think you go on the road at Missouri and beat them, snapping that, was it a 2-game losing streak you have to them? I think you get the win there. And then, of course, you get your last bye week of the year before you play your in-state rival, the way you finish up every single season, Florida State. Now, fortunately for Florida, Florida State has hired one of the worst coaches right now at any Power 5 school there is. This Willie Taggart is in over his head. He doesn't know what he's doing. Florida State fans, by the way, the most emotional, mad, upset, and triggered fan base in America when it comes to the Uncle Lou comment section. If I say anything other than Florida State's going 12-0 and probably beating Clemson in the ACC title game, these people are crying like a bunch of 3-year-olds who lost their pacifier. It's absolutely the funniest thing I've ever seen. I think I picked Florida State to go 8-4 or 9-3, and these people are completely besides themselves that I'm an idiot. They're accusing me of just hating Florida State. Why would I hate Florida State? We haven't played them in, 30 years? And when we did play them, we beat them. There's no reason for me to hate Florida State. Hell, my Mrs. Lou graduated from Florida State, her undergrad anyway. People always find that funny, but yeah, she graduated from Florida State undergrad. South Carolina, she got her master's degree. So listen, I'm not knocking Florida State because I want to. I'm just not a believer in Willie Taggart. I don't think he knows what he's doing, okay? And chances are, in a year or two when you fire him, you're going to feel the same way. Florida beats Florida State again this year. They finished the season with a big win over in-state rival Florida State, and that puts you at 9-3 for the season, 5-3 in the SEC. So I see a similar record to what Florida had last year. I think Florida will be a little bit of a better team, but I don't like the way the schedule sets up for them this year. Last year, you got LSU at home. This year, you got to play them on the road. So I think that's a game that you won last year that you're likely to lose this year. Now, the Kentucky game, I could easily be wrong on that. That's the game I'm least confident about, I'll be honest with you. Out of the LSU, Georgia, and Kentucky game, the Kentucky game is the one I'm least confident about. So let's say you win the Kentucky game, then that's at 10-2. But like I said, there's always the possibility, you have to admit, the possibility exists you lose to Auburn, maybe even South Carolina or Mizzou. So while I'm not 100% convinced on this Kentucky loss, I'm pretty confident on the 9-3. I really think that's where Florida will fall this year. I do think 9-3 will be good enough for second in the East this year. So you'll improve in terms of that anyway. You finished third in the East last year. I think you'll finish second in the East this year with a record of 9-3, and you'll most likely be headed to another New Year's Six Bowl. I looked up some bowl predictions this morning, and there's quite a few that have Florida in a New Year's Six Bowl against Syracuse. So that would be a possibility. But in any case, like I said, I know there's going to be some Florida fans that think I just hate Florida, and that's where I'm getting the 9-3 from. But I really try to do these videos as straightforward as I can. Yeah, I throw a few jokes in and stuff like that just to keep the videos entertaining. Nothing more boring than just watching somebody read off 12 wins and losses. So I try to keep it entertaining. This isn't a hate video. This is truly how I feel. I mean, let's be real. I have you losing to two teams that in every poll in America are ranked higher than you. So that's it's not unrealistic to think that Florida could lose to Georgia and LSU. Both those teams are ranked higher than you in every poll in America, okay? You play LSU on the road. Georgia's a neutral site. They beat you 2 years in a row. Georgia's more talented than you. So it's not unreasonable for me to predict losses to Georgia and LSU. Now, the Kentucky game, you can make the argument that's unreasonable, and I would be willing to listen and believe you. Here's the thing. Most teams in America, every single year, lose at least one game that no one expects them to lose. Almost every single team loses at least one game a year where they're the favorite, right? Florida lost to Mizzou last year. Florida lost to Kentucky last year. You were favored in both of those games, okay? They were both home games. You were big favorites in both of those games. You lost both of them. It happens. Georgia lost to Auburn as a favorite a couple of years ago. Georgia lost to Ole Miss a couple of years ago as a favorite. Lost to LSU We lost to Texas as a favorite in the Sugar Bowl. It happens. It happens all the time to almost every single team. Alabama and Clemson were both 14-0 when they met in the national title game last year. First time that's ever happened. So usually even the elite teams drop a game somewhere, right? So I'm just banking on that being the case for Florida this year. I think you'll lose to Georgia and LSU on the road. And then I think you're going to lose one more game to somebody that you're not supposed to lose to. My guess for the purposes of this video is Kentucky, but it could easily be Auburn, maybe even South Carolina or Mizzou. I'm confident with the 9-3. That's my final prediction for Florida for the 2019 season. 9-3, second in the East, New Year's Six Bowl. Have a great morning.